Hello, everybody, and welcome to what is the second webinar in our series, #The Fundamentals. Thank you very much for joining us. We're focusing this webinar series on looking at how immersive technology can aid in training and education. And my name is Ashley. I'm the Director of Ophthalmology here at Fundamental VR. And this week it's a particularly exciting topic for me because we're taking a deep dive into ophthalmology and really looking at how immersive technology, particularly virtual reality, is being applied and can be applied in the future to aid in training and education. I'm also very honoured and privileged to be joined by an incredible panel of ophthalmologists and educators, all of whom share a passion and an interest for global ophthalmology. So it's great to be joined with them today. And I'm going to just go around the panel and just let them introduce themselves. So Dr. Hunter Cherwak, it's great to see you. If you could say a few words.
Yeah, good evening. Good morning from Mongolia. I'm here as part of Orbis International. That's a nonprofit that I'm part of, where I serve as the Vice President of Clinical Services. We really look at technology and training, and I'm very proud to say we've been a partner with you for more than 2 years, building a simulator for small incision cataract surgery. So I'll be talking a bit about that today before I jump on a van and head to one of our hospitals. So thank you all for having us.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Cherwak. I appreciate you joining us all the way from Mongolia today. Next, we have Dr. Jacqueline O'Banion. Dr. O'Banion, it's great to see you. If you could introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Jacqueline O'Banion. I am at Emory University. I'm the Director of Global Ophthalmology, where I oversee our research and education and outreach, both locally throughout Georgia and internationally. And I'm one of our primary cataract instructors at Grady Memorial Hospital for our residents.
Great, thank you very much, and it's great to have you here. Next, I'm going to head over to Dr. Jeff Petty. Dr. Petty, if you could introduce yourself.
Good morning, afternoon, evening. My name is Jeff Petty. I'm joining you from Salt Lake City, Utah. I work at the Moran Eye Center, where I'm our residency program director and vice chair for education. I, like the other panelists, have had a career in global ophthalmology in various capacities, but specifically in the capacity of building and establishing residency training programs around the world. Look forward to sharing with you our experiences.
Great, thank you very much, Dr. Petty. I'm excited to hear from you. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Malik Kahuk joining us.
Hi, Malik Kahuk, University of Colorado. I am professor of ophthalmology and I direct the glaucoma service here at the university. I also spend a significant amount of my time in startup companies that spin out of our laboratories, and I chair the medical advisory committee for Orbis. So I'll try and bring all of those different aspects of what I do to the discussion, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Great, thank you very much. And it's great to be joined by everyone on the panel today. And so before we go ahead and jump into hear from our panelists, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the topic and what we're talking about here to set some context. So the topic of the webinar is really looking at how immersive technology is being used to optimize training and education in ophthalmology across the globe. And why are we talking about immersive technology? So I think we'll all be familiar with see one, do one, teach one. And this is a method of training that has served the surgical community extremely well for hundreds of years. However, it hasn't really moved on for hundreds of years, and the world has moved on, particularly from an ethical standpoint, from a legal standpoint, in terms of safety standards, and also in terms of complexity. And a big part of that complexity comes from the incredible rate of innovation that we see in medicine in general, but particularly in ophthalmology. One of the reasons I love working in this sector is the dedication to technology and the incredible products, both in pharmaceuticals and medical devices, that we see coming to the market. So what we're doing is we're trying to match that rate of innovation with an equally innovative training and education tool. And so we've created a flight simulator for surgeons. And I like this analogy because it's a simple one. We know that pilots need hundreds of hours of simulated training before they can take the lives of passengers in their hands. And we think surgeons should be given the same opportunity. And so we're using this technology to accelerate knowledge, to accelerate skills acquisition, and also to accelerate product adoption for that incredible rate of innovation that I mentioned for pharmaceuticals and medical devices. And so the reason we're doing this and the idea behind utilizing this technology in this way is to address the challenges that are faced in surgical training in general, not just in ophthalmology. The challenges of time, so optimizing your time in the OR that you have on a patient, access. So being able to access traditional methods can sometimes be difficult, as well as training tools and devices such as microscopes, phaco machines, etc. And then the cost that's associated with these things. And we know that the pandemic has obviously exacerbated all of these things. So really we're focusing our application of immersive technology to address these in 3 kind of key modalities. The first one of which is haptic VR. And you can see an example of this being utilized here. And haptics just refers to the sense of touch. So this combines fully immersive VR with a sense of touch. So you get the feeling of delicate tissue textures, the micro dexterity. So you feel like you're touching a patient. So you can start to build up that skills acquisition and that kind of muscle memory that's associated with these procedures. And this can be applied from anything from cataract surgery, as you can see here, to retina and everything in between. And so it's a really cool modality to be able to give someone that hands-on training and really build that skills acquisition. The next modality is what we call standalone VR, and this utilizes an untethered standalone headset. And whereas it's not so good for the procedural skills acquisition, it's really, really effective in being able to be immersed in a room, set up your microscope, your machinery, learn to work with tools, because we know that, ophthalmology is not just training your hands and going through the surgery, it's all of these things that come with it, and that situational awareness. So this is a really valuable modality for that aspect. And then the last one, which has become crucial during the pandemic, and it kind of transcends both of those, haptics and the untethered standalone devices, is collaboration VR. And this really just allows people to join together and work collaboratively in a virtual space without having to be together in a central location. This can be really effective for team training. We know surgery is a team sport. It's not just the surgeon, but also for didactic training in a classroom environment, working on a patient together, joining experts with novices, reps with surgeons, and for ongoing training. So I think this modality in particular is really, really cool, especially in the wake of the pandemic. And really all of these things and immersive technology in general just allows us to globalize this access to simulation, and something that used to be quite cost prohibitive can be democratized and accessed anywhere. And I won't focus on this too much because I know that the other panelists will have an interest in talking about this aspect, but it's important to recognize that this technology is a more low cost but very high fidelity way of getting simulation into the hands of people so that they can train safely and effectively. And I want to just focus a bit on how the technology is being applied right now in ophthalmology. And there's this kind of misconception that VR is something of the future, and every now and again Mark Zuckerberg pops up and tells us that it's all the future and it's coming, but actually it's happening right now. We're utilizing this technology already in ophthalmology to supplement traditional methods and even to replace some traditional methods like wet labs. And we're doing this to support innovation in ophthalmology, particularly for pharmaceutical companies, medical device companies, but also for ongoing procedural training, so for residents, for example. And this, as I mentioned before, can be applied from kind of a low-tech cataract surgery to a high-tech subretinal injection and everything in between. So really the breadth of capability, all within one modality of kind of hardware, is really exciting. And before I talk about those 2 key case studies that we're applying at the moment, I wanted to take a step back and look at the product lifecycle and how immersive tech can be used for pharma and medical device companies right through the product lifecycle. So, for example, from manufacturing, allowing that kind of team training, joining people in together in a virtual manufacturing plant and learning how to work with safety protocols and bits of machinery that you're going to be having to use during this process. Also for clinical trial. And so anybody that's heard me speak will know that this is one I get particularly excited about. I think the utilization for clinical trial is really, really exciting because we're able to take delivery systems for things like, cell therapies or gene therapies and recreate them, 3D print them physically and put them on the end of a haptic arm. And you can then see how people use them. And we can recreate, obviously, virtual patients that are anatomically correct. And so you can see how those devices react inside virtual patients before you move on to the next phases. And this just allows for continuing to iterate on different products and to really get the best out of them before moving on to a patient. And I think, in the future, this is going to really optimize safety and also positive patient outcomes. Commercialization is probably the most obvious and effective use of this technology right now. So whenever a drug or a device comes to market, we need to match it with training and education program to make sure people know how to use it effectively. And they're much more likely to want to use it if they know how it works and they're comfortable. So being able to rehearse with VR and with haptics is something that's really, really effective for commercialization. And then finally, for ongoing training, so not just focusing on new devices and products, but also on residency and continuing to train on the basics of ophthalmology, the basics of surgery is a big application for this technology as well. So I'll focus in a bit now on what we've done alongside Novartis. And this is a case study that we did with them for an ocular gene therapy. And so we recreated a quite intricate, delicate procedure of subretinal injection for their novel ocular gene therapy utilizing haptics and VR. Novartis, being the innovators that they are, kind of got ahead of the curve on this one, and they saw the need for it way before the pandemic. And so they actually had this technology released before then, and they were able to use it all over the world and to train over 100 ophthalmologists all during a pandemic year. So this is a big success story of this technology, in that they wouldn't have been able to do that with wet labs cancelled. They were able to continue their training. And really, it's been effective in that their KOLs and their surgeons, they like this technology. They like the use of it in that they don't particularly enjoy going to wet labs. It's not realistic. It takes time. The anatomy is different. And from our perspective, it's not measurable and it's not repeatable. If you're going to be doing something complex or using a new device, a new delivery system, then being able to repeatedly train on the effective use of it is something that's really important. The other end of the spectrum, then, I won't go on about this too much because I'm going to let Dr. Cherwick talk a bit about what Orbis International are doing with immersive technology. But just to show you the kind of breadth of how we're applying this technology, we've created, alongside our partners Orbis, a manual small incision cataract surgery simulator. And it juxtaposed from the Novartis case study. It's a low-tech procedure that costs about $15. And utilizing low cost technology like immersive tech, it enables it to be globalized across the world. And then one of the really exciting things about this particular technology is the ability to remotely proctor. So to have someone join in with residents around the world and teach them how to do a capsulorhexis in real time is particularly special. So really enabling that hands-on training in low and middle income countries, I think is a great application for this technology in general. So with that, hopefully that's given you a bit of context what we're talking about today and how immersive technology has been utilized so far in the field. And I'm going to pass over now to Dr. Hunter Cherwick to talk a bit more about how Orbis International are utilizing immersive technology.
Well, thanks, Ashley. That was a great talk. And certainly as my slides come up, I just want to tell everyone I'm actually in Mongolia now, working with small incision cataract surgeons using the fundamental VR platform and technology. So certainly if we go to the next slide, I want to thank you all, not just for this opportunity to talk, but also for the 2-year partnership. Building this was really your first venture into ophthalmology, and I want to thank you for selecting us as a partner. And we're standing by us as we install these in 7 different countries and do remote trainings, as you said, during the COVID pandemic. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that really since the COVID pandemic, we've relied heavily on simulation, as we've not been able to operate our flying eye hospital as we've done historically for the past 40 years. And I think Ashley rightly pointed out, we are not going to go back to 2019 training. I think we've learned too much from blended learning, from remote surgical mentorship, and certainly the digital assets that we've created on our learning platform called CyberSight. We're really going to enhance the surgical training that we were doing historically. And certainly one of the things that I've appreciated is how much research our organization has been doing over the past 2 years. And as we launched the first version of the Fundamental VR platform, we wanted to test the data in a randomized clinical trial. So, and you'll see the details of this trial called Gloves, that you'll see that we really wanted to get user feedback to help build the second version and enhance the functionalities, put in more haptically enabled steps. But also we wanted to look at the impact of training and how this was a time saver for people like Jeff and Jacqueline, who are constantly doing residency training. We now have done a lot of the automation where they can take a basic science course for cataract, they can do lectures online, and then once they demonstrate competencies and complete those tasks, start executing with their hands, which they all like to do. Certainly, I think a lot of times unproctored wet labs can teach a lot of bad habits, and I don't believe that practice makes perfect. I think perfect practice makes perfect. And one of the things I like about these simulators, A, they are tightly gated and can be monitored, but also they are able to repeat a step over and over again and get real-time feedback and scoring. Instead of getting the qualitative, you did a good job, you got an 87, here were the 2 issues that detracted from your score, let's try that again. So on the next slide, you'll see kind of how we're using this amongst our program portfolio. And one of the things we've learned, not only with the simulation program with Fundamental VR, but with other, Model Eyes and other simulation training, we really have to engage the new crop of residents and surgeons in an intelligent way that makes sense for them. So handing them the BCSE series books and say, go read these is not going to work. And we really have to find ways to deliberately have them practice in a controlled way, because a lot of times we're not there. And sometimes now we're doing home training program where we're teaching residents how to use the Fundamental VR and they're actually taking it home with them. All of that is standardized but customized to the local techniques and supplies that are available. Certainly the feedback loops, and again, I talked about the importance of numeric data. I find that a lot of the residents today want feedback frequently and often. And what really is exciting is how now we're gamifying our simulation programs so that residents from Ethiopia can compete against residents from here in Mongolia. And I just think, like any technology, as Bill Gates says here in this quote, it's super important to make sure you're dropping in technology that's going to be your force multiplier for the behaviors and the systems you're trying to encourage. Just buying a simulator is not going to drive changes in behavior or education. You need to build a comprehensive program, put a point person in charge, and drive that. That's what we've done in all of our testing centers. So on the next slide, you'll see that with CyberSight, we have incredible reach. This is our distance learning platform. India is our strongest customer with, about 1/5 of the entire 60,000 registered users. And we've now integrated a lot of the Fundamental VR platform into CyberSight, where they can take courses. So they're not seeing one, they're studying one on CyberSight. They're simulating one on Fundamental VR, and then they're going in the operating room with a totally different set of preparations. On the next slide, you'll see that I have this concept of remote surgical mentoring done with our partners in Peru, where literally we've connected their wet labs to where Jacqueline is a professor at Emory, and they actually have done the Emory wet lab course, even though neither faculty or resident have traveled anywhere to do that. On the next slide, you'll see that, when we were looking to build a simulator, because there was nothing in the market that met our needs, these were the variables or factors we were looking at. And I was very pleased that Fundamental VR hit all of them. And I think the thing that's been exciting is that we now have launched our prototype or version 1, and now we're collecting a ton of user feedback to build version 2. The portability, and I'm literally in about 20 minutes going to put a Fundamental VR machine in the back of a Land Cruiser and drive for 14 hours to teach doctors in the rural countryside using that same technology. So it is kind of exciting to see that this is highly portable, but also very connected. And as Ashley pointed out, because they're using existing gaming hardware, it's at a price point that our partners and nonprofits like Orbis can afford. I think the thing that she also highlighted that we're excited about is once we build the small incision platform, building other procedures, whether it's trabeculectomies, corneal suturings, or strabismus suturing is very important. And it also gets our doctors comfortable with the remote mentorship. We were doing in a different partner, we were doing live surgical training with pediatric cataracts yesterday in Cameroon. So here I am in Mongolia doing in-person training in the residency wet lab, but then we're doing remote mentorship with real patients in the OR in Cameroon, and that's because they had been habituated on the simulation program. Next slide. So I'm not going to talk through a lot of the detail because I know some of you have familiarity with the platform. What I like is it's not teaching just the procedure, it's building that entire ecosystem. You can see the OR, it recreates the sounds. What is it going to look like when you walk in the OR and sit down at the slit lamp for your first, for the operating microscope for your first case? Next slide. And so this was our trial. Of course, every trial has to have a catchy acronym. And these were the different countries. And you'll see that Jacqueline's university was one of the participating partners in the US. Also, we had partners in the UK. But then we had 3 different continents working together, not only to complete the trial and look at the impact of this simulation on the residents' performance on Oscar scoring, but also looking at things like surgical time, complication rates, etc. Next slide. You'll see that as we built the design, like any trial, we have to have inclusion criteria. All of these surgeons or residents were naive to small incision, but they could have some, and there was some variability in their surgical experience. Next slide. And so right now, as we have our platform with Fundamental VR, about half of the small incision cataract procedure is animated, where they just watch and learn the procedure and how to move inside the eye. The other are haptically enabled interactive steps, and those were the ones that we focused on. And certainly, as Ashley said, we were able to pull the records from the simulator to look at data points, and we're locking this study July 1. So I'll have a lot of this data, and we did submit this as an AAO abstract. Next slide. And so one of the things I really liked were all the residents got the same orientation to the procedure. The intervention group then got a very deep dive and mentorship with some of our faculty, whether it was Dr. Maria Montero in Mexico or Dr. Glenn Strauss in the US. And then we went back and analyzed and surgically graded videos that they did with the Philips model eyes. Next slide. And so I've been very pleased that despite COVID, we were able to do all centers, get them installed and up and running, even though no one traveled. And I think that speaks to the usability of the system. No one goes and sits down with your child when they plug in their Xbox to play video games. I think ultimately this is where I see the simulation platforms going, and residents can take these home. Next slide. And so, even though we're locking the data, we've learned a lot. And I definitely think that we are changing the way we are doing our surgical training at Orbis based on our engagement with Fundamental VR and SIM training. And as Ashley said, we are definitely now studying one, simming one, sequencing one, and then going into the operating room. I really like the analogy of aviation, and obviously at Orbis we work very tightly with pilots. And we're also building in the next version of our simulator, a surgical safety checklist, so that before they even start the operation, they have to identify the correct eye, the intraocular lens, and review the biometry. I think that combining those thoughts, so you're not just training a procedure, you're actually training a pathway of care, is super important. And ultimately, all this feedback is going to design the best platform that meets our needs as a nonprofit. Next slide. So again, I just want to thank the Fundamental VR team. You all went way beyond what was needed in the contract to support installation and remote trainings. I know we were doing time zones and working across language barriers, but your team's been fantastic, and that's why we've been able to do this study and complete it on schedule, even though none of us have ever sat with partners when we were starting this trial. So with that, I think the last slide is to thank you as the audience. This is my email address. If you have any questions, certainly please email me. You can also go to cybersight.org and actually take the small incision course that is part of the randomized clinical trial. So with that, I definitely want to say thank you. I need to jump. I'm going to be in that Land Cruiser in about 5 minutes, but Ashley, thank you and your team for this opportunity to speak about our partnership, but also what we're doing in the SIM space in low to middle income countries.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chadwick. It's great to hear about your work, and I commend you and your team, especially for being able to run the RCT trial, as you say, all during the pandemic. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. It's very insightful, and I appreciate you being here on a busy schedule. So it's great to hear from Dr. Chadwick, and with that, I'm going to pass over to our next panelist, Dr. Jacqueline O'Banion, and let her share some of her thoughts and insight.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for having me. So I was just going to talk real briefly about our experience with the fundamental VR and doing the glove study, and what we felt from there, how this can be used moving forward in residency education and surgical training. So we were, as Hunter said, one of the study sites for the gloves trial. We had some early difficulties getting off the ground with some equipment and issues and things like that. We also had aimed to recruit more residents than we had. However, given the timing, it ended up that we were implementing the study right in the holidays and just before OCAPs. So it became a little difficult to get the residents to participate. The other part that was tough for us was there is no dedicated time outside of their clinical duties. So this was all something that they had to do, outside of their normal work hours. That being said, we had a lot of people that were interested and excited about it. They were just hesitant to sign up and commit to something and not be able to deliver in terms of the time requirement. But those that did participate really liked it. They thought that it was a whole lot better than having no surgical experience. They felt that it was real. Those that have had surgical experience felt that it was realistic. They liked the haptic feedback. There was some feedback that it could be frustrating at times with the actual feedback of steps that they were doing, that they would have liked more instruction in that area. And then they knew that this was, as Hunter has said multiple times, that this is the beta version. This is just getting it out there, trialing it, trying to see where they need to improve before they put the whole thing out there. And so they understood that and felt that it was going to be a really great tool and something they were excited to see develop and move forward. So next slide. So from our discussions, some of the areas that we felt that this is really beneficial in residency training is that it gets residents in the OR, right, even though it's virtual, very early. So they can learn those beginning steps, master each step individually without having to have someone right there with them. We've actually found that this is really the key to getting residents in there and learning and training early, is to have set curriculum and set steps with feedback that they can do independently, because we're all busy. They have many clinical duties. We, as the trainers and the practicing ophthalmologists, have a lot of duties and being pulled in different directions. So it can be hard for residents and faculty to find that time to get into a wet lab together. And so we have found that having this independent learning with very structured learning and structured feedback has been a really great way to learn the foundational skills of surgery. Next slide. And then, of course, the global benefits of this, is Hunter said, it's small, it's portable, it's relatively inexpensive. And I would reiterate the portable. It's not a huge machine that needs a shipment to get across. It's something that can fit in a suitcase and be used as your carry-on. The other big benefit is, for a lot of places outside of the US or Europe, there are many more learners than there are instructors or teachers. And so we can see this as a really great area to build and allow residents in other countries to get where there aren't as many teachers to sit in the wet lab with them and teach them these skills. This is a way for them to get distance mentoring and teaching and start getting their hands in there and learning these foundational skills. So overall, our experience was very positive. We, had some frustrations and some hiccups, which is to be expected with any new technology. And we can definitely see the benefits of this moving forward. And I just want to say thank you again to the Fundamental VR team and to Orbis for including us.
Great, thank you very much, Dr. O'Banion. It's great to hear about the work at Emory and how residents were engaged with the trial. And I think you raised an important point that, you know, any new technology, there's always going to be some kind of teething issues, and so it's a really important part of how we apply and use this tech is overcoming those and learning what works and what doesn't, and then just continuing to iterate on it. And that's, you know, one of the nice things about the technology is it's all in code, so you can just change bits and it's fluid enough to be able to fit with that kind of structured learning program that works well. So that's great to hear. Thank you. So with that, I think we're going to pass over to Dr. Petty, and Dr. Petty will be able to share a bit about how he thinks immersive technology is going to be effective both globally and in residency. So great to see you, Dr. Petty, and I'll hand over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's an honor. And again, hello, wherever you are. You know, whatever your background is, whether you're in business, tech, or otherwise, you know, if your journey had been slightly different, maybe you met a mentor at a certain part of your life, maybe you could have been in medicine, finishing medical school, arriving in an ophthalmology residency. And as such, if you can imagine, you know, sitting down at an operating microscope for the first time, you're going to do surgery inside of an eye. Now, there are three stakeholders I want to point out here. First of all, there's you sitting there as you're holding instruments and you're about to enter inside of an eye. A second stakeholder here is the patient, and you've all been patients, and you can imagine how much trust it takes to sit down and allow someone to do surgery on your eyes, given the importance vision has for you. And then the third stakeholder, this is one that might make a little more sense if you consider, have you ever helped anyone learn how to drive? Sat next to a new driver where you put the keys in their hands and they are driving and you really have no ability to control what's happening. And that's the stakeholder of a teacher. And all three of these stakeholders have really one goal in mind, and that's for the surgery to be done well and for it to be done safely. So there's really a new paradigm in training and residency education. And that paradigm is that trainees, the goal is trainees should have roughly the same complication frequency that an experienced surgeon would have. Now that may seem aspirational. I mean, could we ever reach a point where, you know, a new driver is as safe as a more experienced driver? And in short, that actually is possible. And we've made some amazing strides in ophthalmology through wet labs, through immersive technology. And where this is so exciting, Hunter really touched on, is this is a platform that, due to its low cost and due to its ability to be adaptable, is potentially scalable for the world. So the model is fairly simple. You allow someone to do all of their first experiences through simulation to the point that by the time they're sitting down for the first time with instruments and they're going to be operating in an eye, that is a very comfortable experience. They know what it should look like, sound like, what it feels like sitting in that setting. And then when they have advanced through the learning curve that far, they're in a much safer position to do surgery. And I'll just leave you with this final anecdote. That's an anecdote that's very real. In many, many places throughout the world, the ratio of eye surgeons to patients is roughly 1 per million. That ratio would be much better at a 1 per 25,000. And so if you think about, well, how can one then, you know, for every one surgeon develop 20 more surgeons in a country? Developing a surgeon is a long process. First of all, there's the medical school. Then there's the residency training program. That's 4 years in the United States. That's fairly common throughout the world. In the UK, if you're there, that's something more like 6 to 7 years. And now you're talking about at least 8 years out to just produce your first batch. We can only scale the number of cataract surgeons we need through immersive technology and through something like fundamental VR, that both has an ability to advance people through the learning curve, and second, has an ability to be low cost and scalable to put it in the hands of people that need to have it throughout the world, not just in high resource countries. Again, it's an honor. I feel like I could go on and on. I'm going to pause. You're about to be delighted by Dr. Cahook, and we're happy to take some questions at the end.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Petty. I think that's a really, really powerful anecdote, and especially when you take a step back like that outside and you look at how this technology can be used to scale and to really drive that education to be able to reduce that gap a little bit. It's really powerful. So thank you very much for sharing your insights. It's great to hear from you as always. And as I said, last but certainly not least, we're going to hear from Dr. Cahook, who's going to share his insights on the technology.
That's great. I don't have very many slides to go over, and we can go directly to that second slide. I've already introduced my background. I just wanted to give a little bit more information as to what my perspective is. It might be a little bit different, but I think there are a lot of similarities from what we've already heard from the other panelists. I spend a significant amount of my time as a teacher. I'm here at the University of Colorado. We have a very busy training environment with 6 residents per year. We have several fellows and just a big institution. So there's a lot of training, and a significant amount of that is wet lab and surgical training. A little bit different is I spend a lot of my time when I'm not in clinic and surgery with industry in various spin-outs that come out of our device lab. Our incubator is based in California. I spend a lot of time with Spyglass Pharma. And I also work with a glaucoma company called New World Medical. And I bring that perspective and the importance of training and working with early devices in a way that will lend itself to what the surgeon is looking for in the future. I also work with Sidra Tree Foundation, which is a philanthropic organization focused on training and giving experiences to ex-US residents and fellows. And I mentioned this early on, I also work extensively with Orbis. I chair the MAC for Orbis, and I think Orbis is the global leader in ophthalmic education when it comes to simulation platforms. And I think you heard some of that from Hunter. When I first got invited to join this panel, I wrote some things down on my notes on my phone as I went along when I was in surgery or clinic, or if I was in the wet lab, or when I was using the fundamental VR system, which I'm lucky enough to have access to here in Colorado. And I've been working with it and learning as I go along. I can say that I learned early on in my training how important it is to have realistic wet lab experiences. The surgeons listening in know that you often start with non-human tissue. Oftentimes it's not even ocular tissue. And that has many limitations, from procuring to storing the tissue, and providing a realistic experience that can translate to the operating room isn't always possible. I didn't find a ton of benefit to this approach after the first few sessions where you learn how to do the basics of suturing. The ideal scenario would be to use ex vivo human eyes. But that has several limitations, as most of you know, from an expense to a timing standpoint, getting the tissue and using it in a timely manner. And there are also many more important uses for the tissue in sight-saving surgery, and I think we need to keep that in mind. There is, of course, great benefit from the available artificial simulation eyes that we use, and I've used most of them that are out there. I think they're easily available. They do come at a cost, which I think we should always keep in mind. The various artificial models allow us to perform different procedures, which are more realistic in nature, and I think that's a big step forward. There's still, however, the limitation of accessing high-quality microscopes, getting time in the wet lab, and something we talked about a little bit early on from one of the other panelists, coordinating the schedules between the teacher and the learner is extremely difficult in this environment. And I think you heard about that from the Emory experience as well. We're now entering a new era of simulation with virtual reality. And the move to virtual reality, I think, is greater in magnitude than the move that we went through from biologic tissue to the synthetic eyes. Moving from synthetic to virtual will allow us to have reproducible experiences. And I think these are independent of specific trainers or physical environments. So there are some things that we can do with virtual reality that we can't do with tissue or artificial eyes. We have a change in the level of challenge that we can put into the environment, into the system, that would push the learners in tangible ways. Instead of just having access to one teacher, the learner may have access to a library of teachers that could be leveraged in real time or even programmed into the experience itself. Simulated operating room sounds and lighting. I mentioned this to Ashley when we first met. I think it's really important to have different lighting environment. You know, when you come to the operating room, you see it's not always a very quiet environment. Sometimes there's a little bit of music in the background. You hear people talking. Having that real experience, it's similar to when football players have sound coming into the stadium so that they're ready for game time. We have the same sort of mentality when we go in. We want to know how it feels and to expect these changes that can happen in the operating room. Using VR can be part of a planned progression. I think Hunter mentioned this. You can go from VR to simulation eyes to human tissue, and that can shorten the learning curve. We also have an efficient way to provide feedback in real time. He talked about data, and I think that's extremely important to give real-time feedback to the novice learner. But we have a real need to evaluate the skills of experienced surgeons. And I don't think we talk about that enough, at least not in the US, to make sure that we continue to evolve and improve skill sets. VR is an ideal platform to accomplish this. VR is an excellent way to achieve equity across different training environments. Large academic teaching centers will no longer have a corner on the market when it comes to training and transferring skills. And the last point here, before moving on to a last stream of thinking here when it comes to VR, in the special case of industry and device development, you can do all of the above things that I just mentioned with the addition of doing it at the pace of innovation. I think you can't really overstate that, meaning there's no limit to the number of times you can do a procedure and to what your imagination really will limit you as far as the environment or what the device might be faced with in the operating room. I think all of these are important and would be extremely important for cost-saving measures. You can do this over and over again in the VR setting with real cost savings. So last few thoughts here. What's the ideal virtual reality platform? I'm certainly not an expert when it comes to VR, but if I had a wish list, this would be my wish list. I would want something that's biorealistic, should kind of feel like you're operating on the eye when you're doing it. Portable and cost-effective. You heard about the portability from Hunter. He's taking it for a 14-hour drive to a distant center to do training. It should have multi-specialty application. It shouldn't just be cataract or glaucoma or retina. You should be able to do all of these things in the ophthalmic world so that the residents and trainees can carry forward from the different subspecialties that they're on. Adaptable to learners and modifiable based on user feedback. It should be something that's nimble and can change along with the advancements in the technology. And ideally, it would cross over between different stakeholders, from industry to academia to going into practice on your own. And you should be able to carry it through. Say industry might use it to help develop a device, which then goes to the trainees to learn how to use that device. And they can go back when they're in practice to get even better at using it as they do more procedures. A product or procedure that can follow the learner from industry to residency and fellowship, I think, would be key. And then the last point here is the ability to follow progress, meaning big data. So as much data as we can get to apply it and then introduce new metrics into the system would really revolutionize the way that we train our residents. We can give them real numbers, real metrics. And it's not just the trainees, it's also the attendings and experienced surgeons, because we all need to continue to hone our skills to get better and to continue to refresh with all of the new devices that come on the market throughout our career. I will say that next slide, you can reach me if you have any need to ask some questions about what I mentioned. I'm easily accessible on Twitter or Instagram, and you can email me malik.cahook@cuanschutz.edu as well. So I'll hand it back over to Ashley, and happy to have a discussion about all of this.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Cahook. It's great to hear from you and to hear your insights on all of the applications from academia to industry. And I particularly like that you touch on the situational awareness kind of aspect of learning as something that I also agree is really important. And as we've kind of gone through this journey, we've seen what's really crucial in ophthalmology, and that visualization aspect of just things that you don't necessarily even think about yourself. We're able to then build a picture of it and recreate it in VR, which is challenging, but it's quite cool. So thank you very much. That's great to hear your thoughts on that. We're gonna take a few questions now. So if anybody's got any questions, please do feel free to keep them coming. You can just put them in the chat and ask away. So we'll wrap up here soon, but we've got a couple of questions just waiting. So one that I'll put out to our panel. So where do you see VR training in the next kind of 5 years' time? And do you think it's going to take off and be accepted in ophthalmology?
We're all going to defer to each other. I'll defer to Jeff. Yeah.
I'll go and start. It already is a part of ophthalmic training. So for any device, whether it's a pig eye simulator or it's something more high fidelity, such as this, you want it to have good construct validity, meaning you want it to actually make you better at what you're trying to get better at. So I sit down at a simulator, and then now I sit down at a human eye. You want to have that improvement. So that has already been shown in a number of studies. The common platform that's used in high-income countries and in our residency programs is a wonderful product, it's a wonderful machine. It's just very, very expensive, and it's one that isn't, because of that cost, it isn't accessible everywhere. So in short, it already is being adopted. The obstacle to adoption has been cost, and then both cost and then having something that's low cost that also has that construct validity that actually makes you better at what it's trying to. And that's where, again, that's kind of the brilliance of this platform. The first time I saw this, I literally almost had tears in my eyes, because it was the first time that I saw something that can go anywhere in the world. And, a $10,000 piece of equipment is, fundamentally different than something that's $250,000. When you're starting at, something that might be $5,000 or $10,000, over time, that those costs, as they continue to come down, you could theoretically have this. I'll just leave again with where things are going globally. So Tanzania, perfect country to talk about. On average, one ophthalmologist per million people, between 4 to 6 new ophthalmologists every year. At that rate, they will never catch up. There'll never be enough cataract surgeons to ever have less blind each year. They will always have more blind at the end of every calendar year. And this has an ability and an opportunity to be scaled and be put into these training programs where you can realistically, this isn't invest in a company kind of craziness. This is very much real, very much is happening, and in the next 5 years, this will be rolled out at international sites and be fundamental to changing the course of blindness for people throughout the world.
And I would just say, building on that, as Jeff mentioned, that they're never going to get in a lot of these countries to that critical mass to conquer blindness. And the answer is not just make more doctors, because you don't have enough of them to train those new doctors. And that's been tried in other countries, but then you have, 20 trainees to 3 trainers, and they're being graduated through and let loose into the world with very little surgical experience in training, and at what quality training as well. And so I think that this is going to be where training heads, because it's going to be the only way that we can train more surgeons with the resources we currently have.
Yeah, and I agree, of course, with everything that was just said. And a little bit differently, I think it's going to be just as important in the environment we're in here in the United States. So I think it's going to be important in low and middle income countries for all of the reasons that you just heard. Jeff and I were going back on Twitter with a question that I asked about what's the real unmet need when it comes to global ophthalmology. And I think having more trainees, more doctors is extremely important. And what Jacqueline said, I think, is real. But we also have a need to evaluate our residents differently. If you just walk into a wet lab in any training environment, you see phaco machines in the corner, you see tubing in the corner. We might have tissue, maybe we don't have tissue today. I think you'll see this built into every academic center when it comes to residency training. That's one side of it. The other side is trainees also interface with industry. And I think anybody working on a new device that will eventually find its way into surgeons' hands will have to work in the VR world in order to learn how these devices might be used in different environments for the reasons that I discussed in my 5 minutes, but also to make sure that it transfers to the learner and can grow with the learner. I think you're going to see this with tentacles seeping into almost everything that we do as surgeons.
Great, thank you very much. We've got another question come in from Ryan Bortz. Thanks, Ryan. He says, do you see it as a preference for training in microscopy and phaco? With training, do you foresee it easier for follow-ups and new staff/surgeons?
I'm going to defer to Jacqueline because I don't quite understand the second part of that question, but she probably does.
I'm not sure that I do, but what I am taking it as is this going to be the preference for kind of the steps in surgical training? And I think it is, because we've all been in wet labs, and like Malik said, it's, there's equipment everywhere and most of it hasn't been used, but even that, the tissue and that tactile feedback is not correct. And you're trying to teach these wet labs and people are struggling. You're like, well, don't worry, it's not really like this. When you get into a real lab, it will really be different. And so I think that this is going to be a better stepwise approach to get the trainee in ready for kind of that in vivo or in the OR setting.
Yeah, and if I understand the first part of that question correctly, I touched on this a little bit. I think any system that will have wide use should be amenable to any type of surgery that we do. And it doesn't have to be necessarily something we do with a microscope. It might be plastics that we do where we're doing lid surgery and we're training residents on how to do more lid surgery, or strabismus. With the fundamental VR system, we can do manual small incision cataract surgery, but you also have a platform where you can do subretinal injections, and you showed some of that in the initial talk. I think that's going to be extremely important, and I wouldn't really paint it into one specific corner of our training. I think it can be adaptable, and that's one of the strengths. It's really limited by the imagination of the programmers, the engineers working on it.
And on something, well, go ahead, Jacqueline.
Well, I was just going to say, just touching on that last part about new staff and new surgeons, I think it's a good way to get that comfort level back. So when new surgeons maybe have a complication and they can go back to the simulator or the VR and say, I just need that kind of confidence build before I go back into the OR. Or even speaking personally, I mean, I took a 1.5 years off of medical work between finishing my fellowship and starting my first job because I was doing an MPH. And so having that ability to go back to a simulator and just kind of get used to sitting at a microscope and sitting and using my hands and that kind of steps was very useful to me as a new surgeon to get that confidence back up. So just want.
Yeah, Ryan, great question. Spawned a lot of comments. You know, we're talking a lot about global work and education of residents, but if you can imagine a scenario where, you know, every training program has one of these systems in their hands, you know, if I'm in industry and I have anything coming to market, knowing that now this platform is everywhere, it is such a no-brainer to dig in, partner, let's give them the experience they need. And as experienced surgeons, I mean, you know, Malik's been involved in so much innovation and development in ophthalmology. Every time there's a new device, which is multiple per year, the options are a wet lab with the device, and that's pretty much it to date. And if you have an alternative that can give you a different experience. Now, let me just pause and explain what I mean by that. No simulator has the monopoly on being good for everything. A pig eye is amazing for doing certain parts of training. It's literally analogous to operating on a human. And there are other parts of a pig eye which are entirely worthless if you were to try to use that. Whereas virtual reality simulators bring in some really useful utilities you can't get with a mechanical eye or an animal model. And so again, as you think about industry coming in, giving some of the nuances to these new devices that you can't get just by using a model eye, that's going to be really key. And frankly, I see this becoming the standard of care for any time a new device is rolled out.
Thank you. And I think you touched on a really important point there, actually, that I didn't particularly speak about. And that's about the ability as well to use VR as a test bed. So you don't just have to use it once you've commercialized the product and rolled it out. You can use it if you're wanting to test. You know, it might be a new lens or it might be a new feature on your phaco or your microscope. You can then roll it out, or industry can roll it out to trusted, you know, partners and surgeons to get feedback before they then implement something that might not necessarily work very well for people. And also from an industry perspective, with this kind of training, of course, you can use it for internal training as well, for reps and for joining reps with surgeons together for that collaborative element. So I definitely think that's an important point. I think we've largely answered the next question, but someone has asked what are the barriers to implementing VR into residency programs. And so I think one of them that we kind of addressed head on was the cost. And hopefully VR and immersive technology is going to solve those big, heavy cost issues. But I'd be interested in your thoughts on, you know, in terms of curriculum and integrating virtual reality into residency, what you think the barriers might be there.
I would say that, you know, medicine, as you said, it's taken hundreds of years of do one, see one, do one, teach one, and it's not going to be changed overnight. And so I think there's still going to be some holdouts, some people that don't believe it, that say it might teach bad skills, that say, you know, it's not the way I did it, that's not what we do. And so I think that there's still going to be some pushback on adoption from that standpoint, but that will change with time.
Yeah, I love that comment. Yeah. So something you wouldn't have considered. So if I'm a little further along the surgery curve than someone else in my same year, every time I work with a surgeon, I'm more likely to get more cases from that surgeon, right? If I'm working with Maluk and I'm a little bit more adept and he feels safe and comfortable, I'm going to be able to do more cases. And over time, what will happen is by the end of residency, when you magnify that, I might have 50 more surgical cases than someone who's a little bit slower on the uptake. So why is that important? To answer the question, when the technology is good enough that it really works and it accelerates you on the learning curve, residents are incentivized to do anything that will make them better surgeons so they can get more cases. This is not really a joke. Doing surgery is almost like getting hits of cocaine for residents. They become so focused on getting just one more case. They will do anything. They'll show up in the middle of the night. They'll go to any clinic. And I can tell you, if they know, if I do this, I will get better and I will do more cases, that will take care of itself. It's really the development of something that is high fidelity, that has good construct validity.
Yeah, I think you found the headline for this course. So surgery is like cocaine for residents. If you just put that on social media, everybody's going to watch the replays on this. So the only thing I'll add to the discussion, I think cost is certainly a big thing. I think even bigger than that is everything that Jacqueline touched on, which is just the way medicine works. One way to sort of leapfrog all of the barriers that have existed to any new development in medicine is to get all the stakeholders on the same page. So if industry gets into VR and they train residents on VR, the attendings will look at that and say, well, I need to learn how to use VR. And once you use it, you understand intuitively the benefit of doing it. And I've used VR platforms in the past. And then, you know, Ashley, when you were here visiting and I got to put the goggles on and then subsequently use it, it's a different feel when you're actually doing it versus thinking about, well, I kind of used one a while ago. The evolution is real and it keeps getting better. And I think that's really important. And so Ryan asked another question here, and it was actually, it kind of dovetails into another thing that I was going to say. So he's asking specifically about the Cahook dual blade. Is there a VR simulation? There isn't one for the Cahook dual blade, beneficial for it. But we had another startup called Claire Vista, which was focused on intraocular lenses that was eventually acquired by Alcon. And during the development process, we actually made 108 different lenses and platforms to study, and we had to make them and test them in pig eyes, cow eyes, you know, different environments. We would have saved so much time and money if we were able to just model it, put it into the environment, and just see how it interacted with different scenarios inside of the eye. I think there are real tangible benefits. When we talk about cost, we should also talk about cost savings with using VR, and I think those cost savings are real.
That's great. Thank you very much. So I think that's probably about all we've got time for, but it's been a great discussion. And thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Petty, Dr. Cahook, and Dr. O'Banion, and for your dedication to global ophthalmology and to training and education. It's really impressive to see and great to get your insights. Thank you very much to the audience as well for joining. And please, if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to us and ask any questions that you may have. But great to see you, and thank you very much. With that, we will wrap up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.